The desert wind whispered like a ghost through brittle sagebrush, carrying with it a silence heavy enough to drown the memory of war. A lone figure moved steadily beneath the bruised sky, his eyes shadowed not by nightfall, but by the weight of a past too cruel to forget. This was no mere warrior. He was a man haunted by the screams of blood and loss, a single Apache soul seeking a fragile peace in a wilderness that respected neither mercy nor rest. The land stretched endless and harsh, a barren expanse where cracked earth met jagged cliffs, and the orange sun sank deep behind distant mountains. Dust curled in swirling spirals, catching the dying light, while crows perched on gnarled fences croaked warnings into the wind. No sound dared break the hush except the measured steps of the Apache, his moccasins barely stirring the dry soil as he approached a worn settlement, clinging like a fragile hope between rock and sky. His lean frame bore the marks of countless battles, scars traced like faded maps across skin stained with the dust of exile. In his eyes burned a flicker of ancient fire, tempered by sorrow, a fierce resolve entwined with the ache of loss. He had left behind a village swallowed by fire and betrayal, siblings torn from him in the chaos, and now wandered restless, torn between the desire to vanish into the vast silence and the unbearable pull of memory. As twilight shrouded the land, sudden cries shattered the fragile calm, a woman's scream, raw and desperate, cleaving through the cold air like a blade. They came from the old barn at the edge of the settlement, its timbers warped and faded, shadows pooling beneath its eaves. The warrior froze, muscles taut, senses sharpened by years of survival. His heart thundered against ribs bruised by ghosts, as conflicting emotions surged. The instinct to flee warily clashed with a loyalty as deep and unyielding as the earth beneath his feet. Every footstep carried him closer, cautious and silent, the sounds of the night folding around him like a cloak. The closer he drew, the clearer became the sinister melody of heavy boots, crunching over broken glass and dry straw, punctuated by cruel laughter that gnawed at his very soul. Inside, mingled with the despairing sobs of his sisters, were voices of menace, reminders of a violence that refused to be buried with the day. He pressed his back against the coarse bark of a tree, breath shallow, mind racing with memories and dread. The desperation in those cries was a summoning, a call he could not ignore despite the simmering risk. To intervene meant casting off the fragile hope of anonymity he had clung to since the fires took his home. Yet to stand aside meant betraying blood bound by love and pain. Then, through a narrow crack in the weathered wall, he glimpsed a shadow moving with calculated cruelty, a man wielding a cruel blade, glinting faintly under the pale moonlight. The scene imprinted itself with brutal clarity. His sisters, huddled and trembling, caught in a cage not just of wood and metal, but of terror. The weight of helplessness surged briefly, only to ignite a roaring tempest within him. This was no mere threat. It was a reckoning writ in flesh and bone. The silence now shattered beyond repair, his resolve hardened like the stones underfoot. The fierce, ancient blood of his ancestors surged anew. He would unleash a revenge as fierce and unrelenting as the desert sun. There could be no mercy here, only justice. The night hung heavy with the promise of violence and redemption, and the lone Apache warrior, prepared to cross the shadowed threshold, driven by the cries of those he swore to protect. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompañam nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. The moon hung low, a pale witness, as the Apache warrior slid through the shadows, every sense taut like a bowstring. The barn loomed ahead, weathered, forsaken, but alive with menace. Inside, the echo of his sister's pained cries mingled with the cruel jeers of rough men, whose faces he could not yet see, but whose fury he felt deep in his bones. He pressed himself against a rotting fence post, letting the darkness cloak him while he traced the ragged sounds. His eyes adjusted, revealing a grim tableau. 3 brutal mercenaries, faces streaked with grime and malice, pacing inside, with heavy boots that cracked dry straw beneath them. Their laughter was jagged, slicing the cold air, a sound that burned into his memory like firebrands. They cared not for the land, nor its people, only for breaking spirits, for conquest by cruelty. The warrior's heart clenched at the sight of his sisters, huddled in the corner, trembling beneath the shadow of a battered wooden beam, their eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. This was no ordinary attack. It was a calculated offense, unmistakable in its cruelty and purpose. These men sought to shatter the fragile threads of resistance his people still held. The warrior's years of solitude, the weight of exile, tumbled from him like worn cloaks. There was no room for hesitation now. He pressed a fist to his chest, drawing steady breath. Violence was never the first call for his spirit. But here, now, that choice belonged to survival and blood. His fingers brushed the hilt of a silent knife concealed beneath his tattered coat. He considered the yawning entrance, the single door slightly ajar, revealing flickering lantern light leaking into the night. The perfect breach. A plan crystallized in his mind, swift and merciless. He would strike fast, like the desert wind that had both welcomed and tormented him all these years. First, keep his sisters from suffering more pain. Second, teach these men that the Apache soul was forged of fire and unyielding will. Yet, as he prepared for the silent assault, a movement stirred at the edge of his gaze, sharp and unexpected. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping lightly but confidently out of the shadows. The stranger's face was half covered by a wide-brimmed hat, the worn leather patching his weathered coat, hinting at years spent straddling the thin line between outlaw and protector. In his eyes flickered a flicker of something unreadable, a history intertwined with this forsaken town and the blood soaked into its soil. The warriors' pulse tightened. They stood mere feet apart, but neither spoke. The stranger's low voice broke the silence first, cautious, yet laced with a strange familiarity. I know what's happening inside. They won't stop till every Apache spirit is crushed, maybe even yours. His words held a challenge, shadowed with the weight of a past neither was ready to reveal. For a moment, neither moved. The desert held its breath. The warriors studied the stranger, reading the tension beneath his steady gaze, a silent question hanging heavy between them. Could this enigma be an ally, or yet another threat, wrapped in betrayal? There was no time to unravel all secrets now, only to decide. Stand alone into the awaiting storm, or accept help from an uncertain hand. His throat worked as determination settled. He nodded once, slow but irreversible, the weight of his choice pressing down, but steadying him. Together, they slid forward, stealth incarnate, closing the gap to the barn's creaking door. The cruel laughter inside deepened, as if the tormentors sensed victory was near. The warrior's eyes burned with promise. This night would not end with silence and suffering. A sudden scuffling sound inside dashed any hope of calm. The mercenaries shifted, their attention sharpening toward the barn's periphery. One cursed loudly. Time fractured into knife's edge seconds. The stranger whispered, "We hit fast and hard. You free them. I'll cover your back." With a single breath, the warrior summoned the ancestral fury coursing through his blood. Muscles coiled like a spring. The door slammed open, a thunderclap shattering brittle shadows. He burst in, fierce and unforgiving. The first man barely saw the flash before a blade kissed his throat. The second found himself pinned against the wall, gasping for breath beneath a grip that promised no mercy. The third turned, eyes wild, but the stranger's pistol barked twice, striking fear into the room's heavy air. His sisters leapt toward him, faces streaked with dirt and tears, bodies trembling, yet emboldened by his presence. The warrior's voice was low and rough, a balm to their shattered spirits. "You are safe now. No harm will find you." But just as breath began to settle, fresh footsteps pounded the dry earth outside, a cruel reminder. Their enemies were not alone. The mercenaries, though wounded, clawed for weapons, snarling like cornered beasts. Panic rippled through the sisters' embrace, the barn now a cage of shattered peace and impending chaos. The stranger's voice was grim. "This is bigger than you know. The sheriff, he's behind this. Wants to wipe your kind clean from these lands." A cold fire ignited within the warrior's chest, a mix of rage and cold calculation. The fight was no longer just for rescue. It was for survival, for justice, for a reckoning long overdue. Outside, the shadows shifted as more men gathered, cruel silhouettes against the moonlight. The warrior glanced to the stranger. No more doubt. It was time. The night swallowed them once more, thick with the promise of blood and vengeance. But in the heart of that darkness, a fragile hope glimmered. Because tonight, beneath the battered rafters and broken fears, an unspoken alliance was forged, one that could tip the scales in a war yet to come. And as the first blasts rang out, carrying the spark of uprising, Into the starless sky, the warrior's gaze never left the edge of the barn, where friend and foe danced on a knife's edge, until the stranger whispered fiercely, "We're not alone in this fight." The crack of bones and grunts of pain echoed in the oppressive darkness as the Apache warrior's blade found its mark, again and again, swift and unyielding. His sisters, fragile shadows just moments before, now pressed close behind, gathering courage from the thundering beat of his heart. The rancid stench of sweat, blood, and fear filled the barn, but his focus sharpened like a drawn bow. Every strike was a promise, not just of survival, but of relentless justice. The first mercenary crumpled silently, throat slit, his gurgled curse swallowed by the dust. The second struggled, beneath the iron grip of the warrior's arm, eyes wild with disbelief until a sharp, final jab stilled him. The third spun just as the stranger's pistols barked out, two searing shots tearing through the night, scattering straw and shattering the fragile veil of control the aggressors sought to maintain. His sisters' trembling forms flickered in the low lantern light, their eyes wide and searching for the flicker of safety in the storm. A whispered command from the warrior calmed their shattered spirits. "Stay close, we move fast." But no sanctuary awaited them just yet. Their brief relief broke like fragile ice when the distant pounding of boots erupted outside, the heavy, deliberate march of reinforcements attracted by the chaos. Men aligned with the cruel mercenaries, their silhouettes cutting jagged. Shadows against the moonlit sky, the warrior's teeth clenched, a fire flaring cold and fierce within his chest. The fight was far from over. "We're running out of time." The stranger's voice was a low growl, seeping urgency. "The sheriff's reach is wide. Ain't just greed fueling this. He wants your people erased from these lands." The words struck like a whip crack, igniting a cold storm of rage and grim resolve. The warrior's gaze burned with the ancient fury of his ancestors, fire tempered by years of exile and sorrow. This was no random act of cruelty. It was a calculated war waged from the shadows. He studied the stranger's face, weathered, worn, but eyes sharp with hard truths. The flicker of hesitation remained, a heavy ache of uncertainty. Could this man, cloaked in twilight and mystery, truly be an ally, or a new venom waiting to strike? But the world had grown too dark for empty doubts. "Lead the way," the warrior hissed, voice a razor slicing the thick air. "My sisters come first, but we strike back, hard." Silence thickened, then morphed into swift movement. Together, the unlikely pair slipped from the barn, shadows gliding over cracked earth and scattered hay. The sisters followed, their footsteps hesitant but bolstered by the promise of protection. Outside, the night had thickened into a suffocating blanket. The settlement around them whispered of decay, its empty streets curling with dust and whispered threats. The distant clatter of boots grew louder, a relentless tide closing in. The stranger's gaze darted over the shattered landscape. "There's a path through the canyon, narrow. We can disappear there for a while, gather strength, and learn what this sheriff's hiding. His corruption runs deeper than most suspect." The Apache warrior's thoughts raced, fueled by the sisters' fragile lives, burdened with brutal memories. Names, faces, threats, they all tangled in his mind like thorned vines. His tribe, already scattered and shadowed by grief, now faced a foe cunning enough to wear the sheriff's badge and wield the law as a weapon against them. They moved swiftly, footsteps muffled by sand and shadow. The warrior scanned every dark corner, every flicker of movement, his senses stretched taut. Every shadow could conceal another enemy. Every whisper of the wind carried the weight of unseen eyes. Suddenly, the youngest sister stumbled, her small frame trembling under the endless night. The warrior caught her mid-fall, his arms a fortress against the cruel world. "Hold fast," he murmured, voice steady as stone. She met his gaze, fear raw, but flickering with stubborn hope. "Why? Why come back for us?" she asked, voice a fragile thread. He swallowed the bitter truth that his own past was stitched with abandono and sorrow. Yet now, blood called him back. Because blood is a debt paid in flesh and fire. Because they are not alone. They pressed on until the ragged silhouette of the narrow canyon mouth loomed ahead. Relief surged briefly before suspicion tempered it. This haven was also a trap, if tracked. As they slipped beneath the jagged cliffs, the sharp sound of a distant whistle broke the tense silence. The stranger's hand went to his gun, eyes narrowing. They're closing the circle. More than a dozen men, armed and hungry. The warrior's heart pounded with cold certainty. This was no ordinary raid. It was a purge, reaching deep into every corner of the land he called home. He gathered his sisters close, voice barely above a breath. "We stand together here. No running, no surrender." The youngest sister's tears finally fell, shimmering in the sparse moonlight. The warrior wiped them away gently, feeling the fragile weight of their lives resting heavy on his soul. Suddenly, the stranger's shadow shifted, blending with the earth like a specter of war. "There's more. I haven't told you everything. The sheriff's men, they've allies within your own tribe. Trusted faces turning traitor." Breath. The warrior's breath caught. Betrayal. Deep, insidious, like a hidden poison. His world fracturing on every side. But venom bred fire. He lifted his chin, eyes blazing into the darkness, threatening to consume them. "Then we burn it out." The night around them pulsed with looming danger, yet in that seething heart of the canyon, a fierce resolve took root, a silent vow to unmask every shadow and confront every lie. From the depths of despair, the warrior's spirit rose like the desert phoenix, unbroken and untamed. And beneath the jagged rocks where shadows twisted, his sisters spoke of the horrors they'd endured, whispers of unspeakable violence and threats that reignited the burning forge of vengeance within him. But as the wind mourned through the canyon, a hooded figure materialized, stepping silently. From the darkened village below, a grim herald bearing the sheriff's black command, "Capture the Apache warrior alive." The night held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The narrow passage of the canyon swallowed the wind, muffling footsteps, as the Apache warrior led his trembling sisters deeper into its jagged embrace. Every shadow cast by the moonlit cliffs seemed alive, as if the earth itself bore witness to their flight, holding its breath alongside them. Their breaths came ragged, layered with fear and exhaustion, but the warriors' every sense remained sharp, tracing threats that lingered in the dark like unseen specters. The sisters leaned close, their faces pale ghosts under the rocky overhangs, whispers of past torment still lingering in their eyes. They shared tentative stories, fragments of violence, and threats that had haunted the settlement for months. One spoke of bruises hidden beneath tattered skirts. Another described cruel whispers behind closed doors. The youngest, voice barely audible, recalled nights trembling alone in the barn, hope snuffed by their captor's cruelty. Each confession stoked a silent fire in the warrior's chest, sharpening his resolve like flint against stone. They think breaking us will break the whole Apache soul, he said, voice low and steady. But they do not know the blood that flows through us. As they rounded a bend, the warrior's gaze caught movement far below, the rough silhouette of the village, now a smudge of muted light and shadow beneath the canyon's watchful walls. Amid the flickering lamps, a figure detached itself from the gathering dusk, a hooded shape, stepping silently through the dying embers of town. Cloaked and cautious, the stranger moved with purpose toward the settlement's center. The warrior's grip tightened instinctively on his sister's arm. "Look," he whispered. "There," she said, eyes wide with recognition and dread. "The sheriff's shadow walks the dust again." A bitter wind carried murmurs from the village, like poisonous smoke. Rumors had long swirled of the sheriff's growing thirst for control. Whispers of secret deals, hidden threats, and dark bargains sealed beneath the crest of law. Now, his presence was clear, as tangible and heavy as the boots pounding down the street. The warrior's mind darted, connecting fractured pieces he'd only glimpsed before. The attacks on his family were no isolated acts. They were strands woven into a broader tapestry of betrayal tied to the sheriff's hands. Worse still, the voices carried hints of traitors hidden within his own tribe, trusted faces turned poison. His sisters huddled close as he exhaled slowly. "The serpent coils tighter than I feared." They pressed deeper into the canyon shadows, senses stretched tight. The air grew cold, biting at exposed skin. The youngest paused, fear shadowing her eyes, as she whispered, "Who betrays their own blood?" The warrior's expression hardened beneath the moon's indifferent gaze. Those who fear the truth and hunger for power. Above them, the hooded figure paused in the village's throat, pausing like a silent threat poised to strike. The weight of him was undeniable, an agent of darkness sent to snare the lone warrior alive, as commanded by the sheriff's cold decree. A shiver ran through the warrior, the chill of impending war. His family's sanctuary had shrunk to a shadowed refuge on the edge of oblivion, now threatened not just from without, but from whispers within. He crouched, gathering his sisters close. "We are hunted," he said, voice tight with grim fire. "They want me taken alive." The youngest sister's hands trembled against his chest. "Why, brother? Why capture you?" He met her gaze, the weight of his path settling like stone in his gut. Because I hold a flame they want to snuff, a flame of defiance that could burn their lies to ash. Steps echoed behind them, soft, deliberate. The warrior's eyes flicked to the encroaching darkness, senses coiling against assault. Trust had grown fragile, stretched thin by betrayal and bloodshed, yet his spirit refused to fracture. "Prepare," he whispered. "The hunt will not wait." The canyon swallowed their footsteps as they vanished deeper into its bones, shadows merging with shadows, hunted yet unbroken. Above, the village heaved with the quiet menace of a storm yet to break. And in the heart of that looming night, beneath the shroud of hooded threat, the sheriff's command pierced the silence, a demand made in steel and shadow. Capture the Apache warrior alive. The night held its breath. The war was coming. The Apache warrior sat beneath a gnarled juniper, eyes sharp and restless, as dust swirled around the makeshift camp, scattered on the dry earth. His sisters huddled close, their faces drawn with worry, but the flame of defiance burned quietly within their eyes. The embers of the fire cast long shadows, revealing the contours of a hardened resolve settling over the warrior's features. He pulled a worn leather pouch from beneath his tattered coat, revealing small trinkets and tokens, remnants of a life before exile, memories of allies and promises made long ago. Fingers brushing these worn artifacts, the past and present intertwined in silent counsel. He had reached a decision. No longer would he lurk on the edges while darkness spread unchecked. Gathering what little supplies remained, he mapped in his mind the routes through shadowed canyons and forgotten trails. Contact lines he once maintained flickered to life. Old friends among distant tribes responded to faint signals carried by the desert wind. Allies loyal not just to blood, but to honor. A soft rustle beside him startled his thoughts. The stranger, neither friend nor foe just yet, stepped from the enveloping night. His weathered hat tipped low over eyes that had seen both betrayal and kindness. His voice a gravelly whisper. It's time to strike back. They underestimate the fury of those they push to the brink. The warrior studied him, this enigma, who spoke with a confidence born of scars and secrets. A temporary truce was forged between necessity and suspicion. An understanding shared in the unspoken language of survival. Outside the settlement, tension gnawed at the thin veneer of peace. The sheriff's iron grip tightened visibly, his men pacing the streets with reckless arrogance. Townsfolk whispered, fearful eyes darting between open doors and shadowed alleys. A fragile divide tore the community. Some bowed under the sheriff's threats, while others nursed quiet hatred, longing for justice, but trapped by uncertainty and danger. Amidst this growing unrest, the warrior's network whispered tips from hidden sources. Men and women, willing to risk smiles, stolen in secret, messages traded in hollowed tree trunks, and signs etched beneath the moonlight. Each piece of intelligence, a shard in a broken mirror, reflecting the sheriff's venomous spread. One evening, as dusk settled like a shroud, the stranger's hand hovered over his wound beneath the coat. The faint ache, a reminder of battles fought and scars earned. He lowered his voice. They're tightening the noose. Expect them soon at your hideout. They want you alive, For reasons darker than you know. The warrior's eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight with the iron weight of urgency. Then we prepare. The fight edges closer. But I will not let my sisters suffer more. Wordless, they moved silently through the maze of canyons where daylight barely filtered. The cold stone walls bearing witness to their tense breaths and cautious steps. The mountain shadows became a shield, granting moments to strategize and gather strength. Suddenly, a distant rumble, boots pounding the hard earth. A surprise assault. The sheriff's men, ruthless and numerous, crashed upon the hidden refuge like a storm unleashed. The warrior's instincts flared. His hands moved with lethal grace, a flurry of swift, practiced strikes and evasions. The sisters scrambled into shelter's deep recesses, their frightened whispers swallowed by the roar of conflict. The stranger covered the rear with gunfire sharp and steady, each shot slicing through the thinning night like thunderclaps. The battle pressed on. Seconds stretched to endless tension as the hideout became a cage of desperation and resolve. The warrior's breath was ragged but steady, wounds ignited by the fierce dance of survival, yet his spirit remained unbroken. In a desperate bid, he seized a leather satchel tossed carelessly by one of the downfallen, its contents heavy, a glimpse into the sheriff's twisted schemes. Documents stained with dirt and blood, letters smearing names, plans of land seizures, threats signed with authority masquerading as justice. Clutching this proof, the warrior broke through the closing encirclement, a shadow among shadows, disappearing into the labyrinth of canyons that had long been his refuge. The night swallowed him whole, but inside a fire blazed, fueled by the weight of evidence that could expose the sheriff's tyranny. Ahead, the whispered winds carried news of the settlement itself, fracturing beneath growing fear and mutiny. The community stood at a fragile tipping point. The warrior's gaze hardened, knowing the path ahead was perilous. One misstep could cost everything. Yet, fueled by the unyielding bond to his sisters, and the call for justice echoing in his bones, he pressed forward. Behind him, the echo of marching boots faded. But the danger was far from over. Every breath drawn carried the promise of retaliation, and every shadow could conceal a traitor's blade. He glanced back only once, eyes catching the flicker of lanterns from the distant town, where voices rose in anxious murmurs, words unfinished, allegiances uncertain, the satchel tight against his side. He vanished deeper into the night. Suddenly, beneath the jagged cliffs where the wind whispered of coming storms, a chilling cry tore through the darkness, a desperate warning carried on the air. The sheriff's men had landed a surprise attack that nearly ensnared the warrior in their iron trap. But he had slipped through their grasp, barely, and in his hand, the proof that could ignite a firestorm. Yet the true battle was about to begin. The path ahead was fractured, stubborn, harsh, and riddled with the bitter taste of betrayal. The Apache warrior's pace faltered beneath the relentless sun, weighed down not just by the heat, but by the weight of an unexpected wound carved into trust. one of his closest allies, once a steadfast shadow in his fight, had vanished like smoke in the arid wind. The emptiness of that absence carved sharp edges into his soul. His sisters, fragile yet fierce, trailed behind him, their footsteps faltering but determined. The youngest clutched his hand, seeking the steady pulse beneath his rough palm. Their eyes, once brimming with tentative hope, darkened with fear. Each heartbeat a reminder of the peril pressing closer. The betrayal was not only a knife to his plans, but a fracture in the fragile armor guarding their survival. The earth beneath them seemed to echo with the ghosts of old wounds. Memories, like jagged shards, surfaced unbidden, scenes from a past that shaped his every move. He saw his younger self, a boy marked by fire and sorrow, trembling beside the smoldering remains of their village. The long nights spent hiding in shadows, listening to the cries that tore through silence, the cruel faces of men who had carved pain into his flesh and soul. The scar on his chest, now a dull ache, was not just flesh and blood, but a map of the wounds time could not heal. He sucked in a harsh breath, gritty with dust, grit, and grief. The promise of vengeance burned, fed by the memory of those lost and the cries that haunted his every step. Ahead, the settlement simmered on the brink, the lives of his sisters tethered to an unforgiving thread. The patience of the townsfolk snapped tight, a taut line stretched over a pit of volatile distrust and fear. Whispers stirred like dry leaves, some calling for justice, others for silence, and many caught in the unyielding grip of the sheriff's iron fist. The warrior's shoulders squared beneath the weight of this burden. Every step was a step closer to reckoning. The sun beat down mercilessly as he stopped beside a crumbling wall, his fingers curling into fists of resolve. The betrayal was bitter, but it sharpened his purpose. The allies' desertion stung like a fresh wound, yet it also cleared the haze, clouding his path. "It is in fire that steel is forged," he murmured, voice raw and deep. "And in rage, the soul finds its true shape." His sisters gathered closer, sensing the storm that darkened his eyes. They had survived cruelty together, but the threat now was greater. A war not only of strength, but of fractured hearts and poisoned whispers. The betrayal was a taste of the venom, traveling unseen through veins they once trusted. "We cannot wait for others to decide our fate," he said, voice low but fierce. "If we falter now, all is lost." The youngest sister swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between shadows and the looming threat wrapped in the shape of their fleeting safety. His other sister's hands trembled as she tightened her worn cloak against the biting wind. Suddenly, the sound of dry leaves rustling shattered the tense silence. A quick, unsteady step approaching from behind. The warrior turned swiftly, ready, heart striking like a war drum. But it was not an enemy. It was one of the few allies who had remained loyal, breathless and wary. "They're watching, waiting," he whispered urgently. "The sheriff's reach is tightening faster than we feared. We have no time." His mind raced. His plan, bold and dangerous, had to begin now. The moment had come to tip the scales with a move no one dared expect. To seize the sheriff, to drag his corruption out of shadows and expose the rot eating the very core of the settlement. A desperate gambit, risky as walking the razor's edge, but necessary. For his sisters, for the spirit of his people. He looked down at them, their faces pale but fierce with trust and fear combined. This act could save them, but at a price heavier than any he had yet borne. The dusk deepened, shadows lengthened into night. The air pulsed with the heavy breath of impending storm. The warrior's voice dropped to a whisper, but tempered steel ran through its edge. It is time. I will take the sheriff, alive, to show the world what they hide in plain sight. His sisters clung tighter, eyes wide beneath the gathering dark. Around them the shattered village breathed, a fragile tinderbox waiting for the spark. He crouched low, senses sharp, every muscle coiled for the storm ahead. The path was perilous, lined with treachery and blood. But there would be no turning back, no mercy now, only the reckoning. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it the distant cry of an owl and the faintest whisper of movement nearby. The Apache warrior rose, a shadow among shadows, head held high, with the fire of vengeance raging beneath. Ahead lay a gamble that could save those he loved, or ignite a war that would burn the land to ashes. And with steely resolve, he stepped into the night. Because the decision had been made, he would seize the sheriff in a daring act that might save his sisters, but threatened to unleash an open war upon them all. The night air was thick with tension as the Apache warrior tightened his grip on the sheriff's trembling collar, his eyes burning with relentless fury beneath the brim of his worn hat. Inside the sheriff's dimly lit parlor, cracked with age and scenting of cheap whiskey and rot, the weight of long-hidden atrocities pressed like a noose, tight enough to choke the life from even the strongest men. Outside, the murmurs of the gathering townsfolk churned into nervous whispers that rippled through the dusty street, their faces an uneasy mixture of hope and fear. The sheriff, once the tyrant perched like a vulture over the settlement, was finally stripped of his facade, held captive by the very man his cruelty sought to break. The warrior's voice, low and cutting like a whip, carved through the thick silence. You've bled this land dry with your lies and lust for power. Tonight, the people see what you truly are. The sheriff, slick with sweat and desperation, spat words laced with venom and fear. You think this will change anything? The law's on my side, Apache. You're nothing but an outlaw. Outlaw? The warrior's gaze darkened, cold as obsidian. I am the reckoning. And your time has run out. Behind the captive sheriff, the doors burst open as the local constables, some loyal to the sheriff's poison, others, swayed by the tides of rebellion, fanned out, weapons drawn, and eyes blazing. The fragile order that had kept the town subdued shattered in an instant. The two forces were poised on a knife's edge, the murmur escalating into a roar of mounting chaos. Then came a thunderous clamor beyond the thick walls, the first crack of violence. The sheriff's hidden men, lurking in the shadows of barns and alleys, surged forward with fierce brutality, their assaults spilling into the street like a storm unleashed. The warrior tightened his hold, sensing the weight of impossible choices pressing upon his soul. Behind him, a desperate silence fell over his sisters, held close by trusted allies who formed a fragile shield amidst the chaos. The sheriff's cruel gambit was clear. Use the women as leverage to break the warrior's iron will. His sisters, their faces pale but unyielding, were dragged forward. Silent pleas caught in their wide eyes, a mute testament to the stakes of this deadly game. "Let them go," the warrior hissed, muscles coiled like springs ready to unleash. "This ends tonight." But the sheriff smiled grimly, bloodlust flashing in his eyes. "You want justice? Then decide. Save your sisters, or make me pay for every sin." The town's square trembled under the roar of rough boots and gunfire. The battle lines drawn between those clinging to tyranny and those daring to dream of freedom. Every breath the warrior drew was a measured silence, threaded with electric fury. Families clustered behind crumbling walls. The old barns, shattered windows reflecting flashes of gunfire like shards of broken hope. Bloodied but unbowed, the sisters exchanged a glance burning with fierce resolve, their strength a quiet defiance amid the storm. The youngest, trembling yet fierce, straightened under the warrior's steady gaze. Time twisted into a crucible. To save his sisters meant bargaining with a monster who had maimed their lives. To punish the sheriff meant risking their lives, collapsing like brittle foundations. The warrior's mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, every scenario a blade slicing deeper into his heart. The sheriff's men pressed harder, their offensive brutal and unrelenting. Shadows twisted into specters of dread as bullets cracked, echoing through narrow alleyways. And yet beneath the rain of violence, a single truth blazed clearer than ever before. Revenge demanded a crucible choice. He could not fail them. Not now. Not after every scar etched into his spirit. His voice rose, a fierce roar, cutting through the thunder of gunfire. "I will not be broken by fear or blood. My sisters will live." The crowd, caught in the whirlwind of fate, surged, a chorus of voices rising against the sheriff's iron grip. Old wounds reopened, but so too did the dormant flames of rebellion. But time slipped cruelly, and the warrior's gaze flickered between the desperate faces of those he loved and the cold, calculating eyes of his captive foe. The night screamed with the fury of men on the edge of oblivion. Every heartbeat pounding like a war drum. And then, like a knife slicing through the tense air, the warrior faced his impossible choice. Would he abandon the fight to ensure his sister's safety, or sacrifice all hope of justice to bring down the man who had cast their lives into darkness? The decision hung heavy, suffocating. Beyond the shattered doorframe, the first wave of the sheriff's reinforcements roared nearer. The battle was about to cascade into chaos that could swallow them all whole. Beneath the flickering gas lamps and the cold stare of the stars, the Apache warrior's gaze hardened with a fierce, unyielding resolve. He inhaled fire and grit. The night held its breath, and the stakes grew sharper than ever. Because this was a war on the brink, and only one choice would save them all. The final clash had erupted amidst the cracked earth and dry grasses at the outskirts of the settlement. The Apache warrior, bloodied and fierce, moved with the wild precision of a storm unleashed. His brothers and sisters in arms were few, but their spirits burned hotter than the desert sun. Each whispered prayer to the ancestors fueled their defiance as the shattered village bore witness to the war unfolding at its edge. Gunfire echoed, rattling the air like thunder crashing against canyon walls. Dust billowed, swallowing feet and masking movements, while sharp cries punctuated the chaos. The militiamen loyal to the sheriff pressed forward with ruthless efficiency, their boots pounding like judgment. But the warrior and his allies refused to yield, claws on. Stone, steel against bone. The warrior's breath came heavy, every rasp a testament to his endurance. Anguish and wrath blended inside him, dissolving his usual restraint. This night demanded savage fury tempered by shrewdness. He darted into the thick of the fight, blades flashing, blood spilling, an unrelenting flame that seared the ranks of their enemies. Amid the fury, old allegiances fractured. Faces once trusted, twisted into surprise and betrayal. As some townsfolk shifted sides, choosing fear or greed over justice. The warrior caught sight of a companion, faltering, then withdrawing, a shadow of doubt clouding his eyes. The sting of abandonment cut deeper than any wound, but there was no time for grief. Survival demanded ferocity. Yet, from the shattering bonds rose fragile new alliances. A handful of villagers, inspired by the warrior's indomitable will, seized weapons abandoned in haste. Their eyes sparked with the fire of hope unquenched. An old blacksmith, his hands once steady and kind, now gripped a rifle with trembling resolve. His loyalty a fragile thread woven into the blaze of rebellion. Amid the swirling melee, the warrior's gaze locked on his sisters. Though fear clouded their eyes, a stubborn light shone beneath, their strength unbowed even as the night threatened to swallow them whole. Despite the peril, they moved purposefully, fetching water, bandaging wounds, and whispering courage like sacred hymns. But victory's scent trembled not in ease. The warrior's movements grew sluggish. Deep cuts blossomed pain across his ribs, thick blood soaking into the cracked leather of his coat. His mind flashed between the sting of physical agony and the primal instinct to protect. He would not falter. Not now. The ground trembled further as reinforcements surged toward the barn, the fortress of this grim contest. Men aligned in tight formation, the sheriff's most vicious, armed with everything from shotguns to sabers, closed in with merciless intent. The warrior snarled through clenched teeth, sensing the desperate gamble. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the shadowed barn doors. Through the haze, the sheriff appeared, his expression molded from cruelty and unrepentance. He wielded a pistol loosely in one hand, the other dragging the youngest sister forward, her small frame trembling, yet defiant as she met her brother's burning gaze. She was caught, a fragile captive, made weapons tender in this savage chess game. Time constricted into a fragile thread. The warrior's pulse hammered like war drums, mind racing through every rhythm of battle, weighing every precious instant. surrender his vengeance in exchange for his sister's life, or sacrifice safety to see justice done? The barn creaked ominously as the sheriff sneered, lips curling. "Choose wisely, Apache," he spat, voice thick with hate. "Save her, or watch me die, unpunished." Every cry, every breath, hung suspended in the air like a threat. The sister's eyes, wide, misted with tears, but tethered to hope, anchored the warrior's steely heart. His voice broke like thunder, low and fierce. "No one else shall suffer." Steel met gunfire, shouts erupted, and the night convulsed into chaos that threatened to consume them all. Yet as the first bullet found flesh, and the fragile peace shattered into shards, Sheriff stepped forward, raising his weapon in a final act of violence, aiming straight at the youngest sister's heart. The warrior's world narrowed, fury igniting into blinding light. In that heart-stopping moment, everything hung on the sharp edge of choice. The desperate calculus of love, justice, and the price of vengeance. And as the silence tore away under the assassin's trigger, the war's true reckoning was about to unfold. The final light of dusk bled into deep shadows as the Apache warriors' heavy breaths came ragged, each one a steady drum of resolve. Blood and grit stained his face, his ribs aching with fierce pain, but his eyes blazed with the unwavering fire of purpose. Before him, the broken settlement quivered in the grip of chaos, voices raised in defiance. And fear, hope tangled with dread. The barn loomed at the edge of this storm, its splintered timbers holding the last thread of fragile sanctuary. Inside, the youngest sister's trembling form was a captive tether to a fate that balanced precariously between justice and ruin. The sheriff, cruel and unrepentant, wielded his pistol like a vulture, clutching its last prey. His smear cut through the tense air. "Choose wisely, Apache," he spat, voice thick with hate. "Save her, or make me pay for every sin." The air hung heavy, trembling with the echoes of clashing spirits. Around the sheriff, his men, shadows of menace, bristled with weapons drawn, eyes wild with anticipation. The warrior sisters, pale yet unbending, stood behind trusted allies, their silence a steadfast hymn amid the fury. The warrior's gaze darkened beneath his worn hat, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. The agony that seared through his wounds was nothing compared to the fire blazing against injustice in his soul. "No one else shall suffer," he growled, voice low but fierce, a rallying cry for the burning truth that would end this tyranny. Suddenly, the night shattered with gunfire, sharp and relentless. Bullets spat their deadly song into the dust-choked air. The sheriff's forces surged forward, driven by desperation and cruelty. But the warrior was a storm incarnate. Blades flashed, moving with savage precision, honed by grief and survival. Every strike was a lament sung in steel, every motion a promise carved in blood. His sisters exchanged a glance, fierce with quiet strength, their fear mingling with the resolve born of countless horrors endured. Even amidst the thunder of gunfire, they moved with purpose, bandaging wounds, offering whispered courage, embodying defiance like a living shield. The warrior's breath grew shallow but steady, His body fought fatigue and pain, driven by the unwavering need to protect those who remained. Each step was a step closer to the reckoning long awaited. Suddenly, the youngest sister's wide eyes locked with his as the sheriff lunged forward in a final desperate act, raising his pistol with deadly intent. Time fractured into a razor-thin moment, suspended between heartbeats. The warrior's world narrowed. Fury surged into blinding light, blocking out pain and fear alike. His movements became lightning, a silent vow manifested in the flash of a blade that found its mark before the bullet could claim its prey. The sheriff staggered back, shock and disbelief etched deep into his fading mask of dominance. His eyes met the warrior's, a final reckoning written in fire and relentless justice. Around them, the battle slowed, the tide turning with a roar of rising courage. The townsfolk, weary and fractured, found strength in the warrior's defiant stand, and the quiet power of the sisters unbowed. The sheriff collapsed onto the blood-dusted earth, his reins shattered like brittle glass. Chains of fear and silence began to crumble as whispers of justice spread through the settlement's veins. The warrior knelt beside his youngest sister, way to a fragile smile, a beacon piercing the lingering darkness. His sisters gathered close, their presence a balm to the scars etched into his heart. The weight of loss and violence settled into a solemn peace, a hard-earned reprieve won through fire and sacrifice. The wind carried a softer song now, the mournful whisper of sorrow mingling with hope. The dry earth beneath their feet was scarred, but still standing, a testament to survival and the fierce beauty of resilience. In the quiet aftermath, the warrior's gaze lifted toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to bleed into the violet sky. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by all they had lost and all they must rebuild. Yet within him stirred the steady flame of promise, a vow to honor his people's spirit and forge a future where such darkness could no longer take root. Together, the warrior and his sisters rose, shadows entwined beneath the awakening sun. Their scars remained, etched deep and real, but so too did the bonds of blood, courage, and a hard-won hope. The settlement, battered but breathing, began to stir with cautious life. The echoes of tyranny faded into memory as voices rose, tentative but united, calling for a dawn of respect and renewal between the people of the land. Though the wounds would long whisper their tales in silence, the warrior's final act was one of mercy laced with justice, a statement that vengeance need not be blind, but could cleave a path toward healing. His gaze, distant yet steady, held the weight of history and the fragile belonging found only in standing for those you love. And as the first rays warmed the cracked earth, a new story began, born from ashes and blood, lit by the unyielding spirit of the Apache, who chose not only to survive, but to forge peace in a world scorched by strife. The valley's winds carried their quiet song into the vast horizon, a reminder that even in the deepest shadow, the fire of honor and redemption could never be extinguished. The war was over. The warrior's journey found its end, but the legacy of courage and love endured, quietly waiting to bloom beneath the desert sun.